Somewhere in Nebraska, there's a 1,200-acre soybean farm called Willowdale Farms. Nothing unusual about it, just rows of crops stretching into the horizon.
But if you look it up in state records and trace the ownership filings, the listed address leads to a quiet brick building in the suburbs of a city. And the owner does not live there. The owner has never farmed there. The owner has probably never even seen the land, and the owner is Bill Gates. And Willowdale Farms is just one part of a network of LLCs and holding companies that Bill Gates used to quietly acquire over 275,000 acres of American farmland, all without most people nearby ever realizing who was actually buying it. The neighbors, the people who drive past these fields every day, had no idea who ultimately owned them. That is not a conspiracy. That is simply how modern land acquisition works, and Bill Gates is not even the most interesting part of this story. Part 1. The Setup. In March 2022, wheat prices spiked 58% within a single month, not because of a drought, not because of a disease, but because of war, Russia-Ukraine war, and the world suddenly remembered something it had conveniently forgotten. 2 countries, 30% of global wheat exports, gone. Within weeks, countries across Africa, the Middle East and Asia were scrambling for food imports. Prices surged, governments panicked, protests erupted, food riots broke out, and Sri Lanka's government collapsed, partly because people could no longer afford bread. It wasn't the first time this had happened. Rising food prices also helped fuel the Arab Spring a decade earlier. By the end of the year, hundreds of millions of people faced severe food insecurity. To most people, it looked like a food crisis. To the ultra-rich, it looked like a warning. And warnings create investment opportunities. And the opportunity this time is farmland. Part 2. The Financial Case. Before we go global, let us talk about money, because the financial case for farmland is quietly extraordinary, and almost nobody in mainstream finance covers it seriously. Over the last 30 years, U.S. farmland has delivered average annual total returns, rental income plus land appreciation, that have beaten the S&P 500 on a risk-adjusted basis. It did not crash in 2001 when dot-coms collapsed. It barely moved in 2008 when the housing markets imploded. During COVID, it went up. During the inflation crisis of 2022, it went up faster. The average price of American cropland is now approx $4,000 per acre, a record high as of 2025, up 4.3% from the year before. That is the 5th consecutive year of price increases. Iowa farmland alone tripled in value between 2008 and 2022. Nuveen, the investment arm of TIAA, the company that manages the retirement savings of university professors, now controls 3 million acres of farmland globally, $13.1 billion in agricultural assets, and in September 2025, they filed with the SEC to raise another $3 billion through a new private farmland fund. Also, Jeff Bezos has amassed 420,000 acres, while Bill Gates has 275,000 acres in 17 states. Held through 20 shell companies, and 80% of all rented farmland in the United States is now owned by people who do not farm it themselves. Non-operators, investors, funds, billionaires, governments. The farmer works the land. Someone else owns it. That ratio is shifting and accelerating. Part 3. The Scarcity Engine. Now here is the mechanism underneath all of this. In 2017, the United States had 900 million acres of farmland, By 2024, that number had fallen to 876 million. 24 million acres gone in 7 years, an area larger than the state of Maine, converted into developments, warehouses, solar farms, and suburbs. Between 2017 and 2022, the U.S. lost 141,733 individual farm operations. Since 1950, the number of farms in this country has declined by 3.75 million, a 66% collapse in the American farming class over a single lifetime. The average age of an American farmer is now 58.1 years. Nearly 40% of the active farming population is over 65. Only 9% are under 35. And here is the number that makes all of this urgent. The American Farmland Trust estimates that 300 million acres of U.S. farmland, more than 1/3 of everything that exists, will change hands in the next 20 years. 300 million acres, up for grabs because the people who own it are aging out, with nobody left to pass it to. Their children went to college. They moved to cities. Nobody sat them down and said, "This land may eventually become worth more than everything else in this family combined." Hold it. So when Wall Street shows up with a check, and Wall Street is showing up with a check, most of those families sell. And once the land leaves a family, it rarely comes back. Part 4. The Geopolitical Layer. Now zoom out, because what is happening in the American Midwest is also happening in Africa, in Central Asia, in South America, and the actors are not hedge funds, they are governments. Saudi Arabia imports 80% of its food. The UAE imports 90%. These nations were built on oil, and they are now staring at a future where oil revenue cannot guarantee that their populations will eat. So Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund, through its agricultural investment arm, SALIC, spent $1.24 billion in December 2022 to buy a 35% stake in Olam Agri, one of the world's largest agribusiness firms, operating across more than 30 countries, grains, edible oils, rice, animal feed, supply chains that feed entire regions. Then, in February 2025, Saudi Arabia came back, another $1.78 billion, raising the stake to 80%, $3 billion total, for control over a company that secure a key position in the global grain sector. The continent holds roughly 60% of the world's remaining uncultivated arable land. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, China, Qatar, and Kuwait have all established footholds there through land leases, port concessions, river access deals, and infrastructure agreements with local governments. In parts of Sudan and Ethiopia, Gulf Capital has physically redirected river systems. Water that once served local farmers now irrigates export crops shipped back to the Arabian Peninsula. And then there is China. In 2010, Chinese-linked entities owned roughly 13,000 acres of U.S. farmland. By 2022, that number had grown to 277,000 acres across 29 states, a 23-fold increase in just 12 years. And here is the moment the U.S. Air Force intervened directly in 2021. Bufang Group attempted to build a corn processing facility just 12 miles from Grand Forks Air Force Base, one of the most sensitive intelligence and surveillance sites in the United States. The Air Force called it a significant threat to national security. The project was canceled. The story disappeared from headlines within days, but the implications did not. Analysis published in 2026 found that Chinese-linked entities owned land near more than 340 U.S. military bases and National Guard facilities, including sites connected to America's nuclear forces. 340 bases. Part 5. The Hidden Layer. There is one more layer to this, and it almost never gets mentioned. The investors buying farmland are not just buying soil. Nuveen's SEC filing for their new $3 billion fund makes this explicit. They are targeting farms with sustainable water supplies, groundwater rights, irrigation access, resilient aquifer connections, bundled inside the land deal. And this matters because the United Nations projects that by 2050, 2/3 of the world's population could face water shortages. 2/3 of all people alive. The farmland sitting above deep aquifers, beside reliable river systems, or inside regions where rainfall remains stable through climate change, that land is becoming something more than agricultural real estate.
It is becoming critical infrastructure.
The same category as power grids, ports, and communication networks.
And the investors who understood this first are not making a 10-year bet, they are making a 50-year bet on the price of survival itself.
Part 5. The closing. Let's end with two truths that coexist. First, none of this is illegal. Bill Gates buying farmland through shell companies is perfectly legal. Saudi Arabia acquiring an agribusiness conglomerate is a legitimate financial transaction. Institutional funds targeting water rights alongside land is considered smart investing. Nuveen is raising billions more to own the soil that grows your food. Russia used food exports as diplomatic currency to buy influence from African governments. Saudi Arabia spent roughly $3 billion in 2 months to secure control of a global grain company. Second, the rules were written for a different world, a world where farmland wasn't just a farmland. China tried to buy land near a classified U.S. military base. And America has quietly lost more than 140,000 farms in just 5 years, with almost nobody waiting to replace the farmers who are leaving, and the investors are not waiting for one. There is a version of the future where this ends well, where institutional capital brings technology, efficiency, and stability to aging farmland, where food production improves, where the math works for everyone. That version is possible, but there is another version, one where the consolidation of food production into a small number of hands, private equity funds, sovereign wealth funds. We have antitrust laws for airlines, for banks, for telecoms. We regulate who can own hospitals. We have almost no rules about who can own the soil that feeds you. The billionaires know that. The sovereign wealth funds know that. The question is whether the rest of us realize it before the land is already gone.